Should we get started? Yeah, awesome. So thanks to everyone that's here right now for this webinar, Building a Resilient and Equitable Economy in the Wake of COVID-19. I know that this is a pretty difficult, stressful time for people, so I just want to say I hope that everyone's safe and healthy at home right now. I'm Anna Marchessault. I'm a natural resource ecology student in the Rubenstein School at the University of Vermont. I first got involved with VPIRG as a canvasser last year for the summer canvas. And since then, I've been involved with a student-led group on campus, and I'm a member of the VPIRG Board of Trustees. VPIRG has been working since 1972 to advance our mission of promoting and protecting the health of Vermont's people and environment. In these challenging and uncertain times, we're committed to upholding the mission by prioritizing urgent initiatives like ensuring safe and timely elections, combating scams and consumer abuses, and supporting our local economy. We're also finding new ways like this webinar series to connect with our members, support our community, and provide opportunities for virtual action and engagement. I'm joined here with Jon Erickson, an ecological economist, a professor of sustainability science and policy in the Rubenstein School at UVM, and a fellow of the Gund Institute, as well as a member of our VPIREF Board of Trustees. He really is a leader in this field, not only here in Vermont, but across the world. We'll be talking about the COVID-19 crisis today, how we've been responding to it, and the unique opportunity that we may have in rebuilding our system to be more resilient and equitable in the face of these kinds of crises in the future. If you have any questions now or during the webinar, you can feel free to put them in the chat on Zoom, and we'll have a couple minutes dedicated to that at the end. Jon, do you have anything to add?
No, looking forward to our discussion.
All right, awesome. Then we'll get started. So the situation we find ourselves in with the outbreak of the coronavirus and the responses that we've seen at the local, federal, and global levels, they're unlike anything we've ever experienced as a society. And it's raised a lot of questions around the resilience around our economic and healthcare systems, among other things. With that in mind, I'd like to start off by saying, what does the word resilience mean in the context of a crisis like this? And how does it shape our efforts to address other issues like the climate crisis?
Well, thanks, Anna, and thanks for having me join your members for this conversation. Resilience is a word that we use a lot in academics and lots of systems thinking circles, and all of a sudden it's become the word of the day. So it's in a sense good that we're talking about resilience, but it's too bad we're talking about it in such a crisis mode. It is the idea of the ability to bounce back, right? So we think of resilient people or resilient communities or families, resilient economies. So when you get hit by a shock, right, your resiliency is the ability to kind of bounce back and stay strong in the face of crisis. So certainly the conversation right now is about the resilience of our healthcare system, the resilience of our economic system in this economic shutdown that's happened, and the ability to bounce back. You know, the big question that I've been asking and have been a part of conversations over the last couple of weeks is bounce back to what, right? We often think of bounce back to normal, but what if normal was already a system in crisis? So is this an opportunity to bounce back to something quite different?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, definitely. And how would you ensure that we wouldn't be, you know, like bouncing back to the system that may have already been in crisis before that?
Yeah, I mean, the opposite sort of side of resiliency is vulnerability, right? And we've put so much focus on creating efficient systems, highly specialized systems, globalized systems. And they certainly have helped with one kind of model, which is grow, baby, grow, right? Grow the economy as fast as we possibly can. Don't worry about who gets the benefits and who gets the cost, just grow, just grow. So efficiency has been kind of the ideology of that. Resiliency, really, if we're able to pivot to a philosophy of building resilient economies, fair economies, just economies, we'll be thinking less about efficiency and more about redundancy, right? How do we create safety nets? How do we create buffers to our economic systems, our food systems, our health systems? We'll be valuing all forms of diversity, cultural diversity, economic diversity. We'll be, instead of just prioritizing specialization, we'll realize that the cost of becoming too specialized is the inability to be self-sufficient, right? So we'll be prioritizing self-sufficiency and the essential resources. It's incredible to me to see this conversation about essential economy or essential workforce, right? And you realize what really runs the economy, right, are the overworked, underpaid, undervalued people in our current system that are making the wheels go round, that are keeping the food system in place, that are keeping the healthcare system in place. As vulnerable as it is, we're realizing how non-resilient the current system is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think definitely one of the silver linings is definitely understanding that all of these workers that have been so, paid and undervalued really are the ones that are at the front lines, which is really, it's good to see that they're being represented now more than before. Another question I have is what lessons do you think that we can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic, and how can we apply them as we continue to address the climate crisis moving forward?
Well, it is just to continue on that idea of what's essential, right? I think the big lesson, most immediate lesson, is what are the essential parts? What is the essential workforce of our economy? And how do we properly value and support those essential elements of our economy? We're also revisiting long conversations that we've had in the ecological economics community about the essential importance of the care economy. Not only the kind of paid for care economy, like our healthcare system, but all the unpaid and undervalued work of care, right? Family care, community care, care for the elderly, and who the care economies, whose back is that built on as well, and how that is undervalued and underappreciated in this system. I think one of the lessons that's emerging is the power of local organizing and the power of maintaining local resilient systems. I mean, I think VPIRG is the perfect example of an organization who has touched probably nearly every household in the state, and has the kind of organizing capacity to quickly rise in the times of crisis and make sure that we don't have to count on global supply chains or really slow processes that come out of the federal or state governments, that we can have resilient mechanisms that are built at neighborhood scales, at community scales. So the same lessons of resiliency apply, right? That we want strong networks of networks, that we want diversity and redundancy at kind of community scale, and that at the end of the day, this is a lesson about the power of collective action, right? We've been kind of told this bedtime story that it's up to the individual, right? And society is built on individualism and consumerism and greed is good, and what's best for society is best for General Motors. Well, you realize that that bedtime story is a false narrative in times of crisis.
Yeah. And how would you say that people that are listening or maybe listening later could get involved at a local level amidst this crisis?
Well, it's hard when we're self-isolated, right? It's physically isolated when we have to stay at home. So there's a lot of organizing that's happening online right now. People are using their financial resources to support the local economy. So that's good to see. There's some research that's happening at the University of Vermont right now about surveying people in the food industry to understand where the vulnerabilities are in our supply chains and the degree to which some of our parts of our food system might have some resilience built into them because of their localness, right? So it remains to be seen how this will work. I think at community scales, at city scales, it's going to be a long haul. The kinds of stimulus plans, I don't even know if you can call this stimulus, because we're not trying to get people back to work. We're just trying to kind of, it's really a relief plan that we're seeing come out of Washington, D.C. and out of our capital in Montpelier are really bridges, right? So they're helping us bridge these next few weeks, these next few months. These bridges aren't going to last forever, and it's going to be bridging to those local systems, regional systems. Now more than ever, we need to be thinking about planning at scale, right? At human scale, planning within watersheds, planning within food sheds, planning within energy sheds. That's going to be the kind of new resilient economy coming out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And then, so eventually, once we get the coronavirus control and begin the recovery process, there, like you said, might be some opportunity for us to reassess our system and hopefully make some changes for the better. What are some ways that we could begin to lay the foundations for a more equitable and resilient economy here in Vermont, as well as at the federal level?
Well, yeah, I mean, to try and stick with this theme of resilience and the flip side, vulnerability, I think we're going to have to do an honest assessment of our vulnerabilities. And that means, like VPIRG for a long time has been pointing out that Vermonters spend $2+ billion every year on fossil fuels that we don't make, we don't refine, right? That supports maybe at most 15-20% of that money is recirculating in the economy. The vast majority of it leaves the economy right when it's spent at the pump. So that doesn't lead to economic resilience for Vermont, right? It contributes to a globalized fossil-fueled supply chain built on a growth model that is depleting the world's resources and eroding our climate. Honest assessment of our vulnerabilities is going to have to be about, how do we, we currently invest the vast majority of our retirement income out of state. How do we bring that retirement income back to our state and into energy revolving funds and into weatherization funds and into a state bank system, which has been talked about for a long time, right? So that we can plug that leak in our economic bucket and recirculate that money locally and build resilience in a strong regional economy. We also, export the vast majority of our ag production is in milk as a commodity product. Our agricultural sector in this state is quite literally the developing country model of all 50 US states. We're the most concentrated in one single commodity of any state in the union. And this concentrates benefits in a failing dairy economy, and it spreads costs on everybody else, right? It spreads costs on the environment with the degradation of our soils, of our water. It relies on, again, an underemployed, overworked, in many cases, migrant workforce who live in the shadows of our Vermont economy. That doesn't sound like a resilient ag economy to me. So the hemorrhaging of our dollars on the fossil fuel economy, the lost investment opportunities of investing our retirement income outside the state, the highly specialized ag model that we have in this state are all strategies that lead to more vulnerability. So to be more resilient, right, we need to build the post-carbon economy now, right? Right now, we need to lean into this crisis and say, with crisis comes opportunity. We need to invest in Vermont enterprise now and add a kind of human scale, strengthening our watersheds, food sheds, energy sheds. And at the end of the day, Vermont could perhaps become less dependent on a highly specialized, export-driven economy.
Yeah. What would you say about, how this crisis has sort of disproportionately affected local economies, how a lot of those businesses could kind of rebound after this themselves so that we could keep that economy, going well?
Yeah, again, I think the Monday morning quarterbacking assessment of this is going to be to see where we're most vulnerable. I mean, if we think about our energy economy, to make this transition to renewables, to build a strong locally based energy economy in Vermont is going to require enormous partnerships between our urban communities and our rural communities. The siting of the energy infrastructure in the new energy economy of solar and wind will be in rural communities. We need to pivot to a new model where those rural communities get benefits from that, right? Have a stake in the ownership of the new energy economy. Some of the things I'm talking with Senator Sanders' staff about is what would a Rural Electrification Act of 2020 look like? Rural electrification was a thing that came out of the old New Deal. And under a Green New Deal, how could we imagine a renewable rural electrification project that leans into the history of cooperative ownership and management of the energy grid, right? That again, strategy where we spend our utility dollars and it immediately leaks out to Wall Street or Canadian ownership, that we keep our utility dollars local, that we lean into local cooperative ownership and management of our utilities. It's a little known fact that 55% of the land mass in the lower 48 is serviced by cooperatively owned electric utilities. So that's an example of the kind of resilient strategy, pro-local economy strategy that we could lead the country in here in Vermont.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have a question coming in here in the chat. It says a lot of these programs that you've been bringing up require a large upfront investment. How would you respond to people saying that we don't have the money to make these projects and that doing so would negatively impact the economic vulnerability of Vermont?
Well, that's the framing that we're used to, right? Is that the costs are in the short term and the benefits are long term. We got to flip that framing on its head. We're paying the costs right now, right, of ignoring all the signs of growing health pandemics. We're paying the cost right now, right, of ignoring this move away from fossil fuels and actually actively reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The costs of climate change, for example, are in health pandemics, are happening now. It's just that the people who benefit from the status quo system are able to shield themselves from those costs. There are enormous co-benefits by doing something now about climate change. Air pollution, according to the World Health Organization, kills 7 million people every year, right? And these deaths are in the shadows, right? Because they come from strokes and heart disease and pulmonary disease and lung cancer and acute respiratory problems. The summer heat wave in France last summer killed 1,400 people, right? So these costs are now. The news cycle is such that we've already forgotten about the wildfires in Australia in November, December, and into January that burned 25 million acres and killed upwards of 1 billion animals, non-human animals, right? These costs are now. And so we're going to have to reorient our economic model, transform our economy in such a way that we can capture the co-benefits to dealing with climate change now, reducing air pollution, saving the rest of life, and not sort of myopically imagine that these benefits are going to come in some distant unknown future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of brings up the, kind of fear that people have that, after this, it could go back to business as usual and we could just go back to doing things the same way, which
Sure.
could come at really big costs. So how would you ensure that that's not what's going to happen after this? What will people do?
Well, this is unlike any crisis in our lifetimes or maybe in the history of the world. This is not like the Great Recession, right? Which was kind of a crisis from a house of cards effect, right? There were key vulnerabilities in the economy due to Wall Street greed, due to unregulated banking, due to all these sort of magical systems of making money from money. And when you sort of pulled the rug out from that, the whole castle crumbled. This is a shutdown. This is a tidal wave, right? And it's revealing the fact that our economic model is broken. So it's extraordinary to me that mainstream politicians and mainstream media is talking about universal basic income, right? And it's extraordinary to me that people are able to see what Senator Sanders has said for forever, right? That we need universal health care, not to just benefit like the person who doesn't have health care, but to benefit the whole health system, right? Because without universal health care, the whole system is vulnerable, right? You don't want a system where people can't afford to go to the doctor, right? When they get the coronavirus, they can't afford to be tested. They're afraid of going into the emergency room because of the unending bills that will fill up. And then those same people make the whole healthcare system vulnerable, people both with and without healthcare. So it's a wake-up moment. It's something that the federal government can't do alone to fix this. The state government can't do alone to fix this. It's going to require action, collective action at all levels.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone has any questions right now, feel free to just put them in the chat. We do have a couple minutes that we could answer a couple of those before our time is up. Jon, do you have anything else that you'd like to say that I didn't specifically address?
Well, I mean, it's not like we're unprepared for what's next. I think I was talking with my wife about this morning. The 2008-2009 crisis led to things like Occupy Wall Street, which led to the new economy movement, which led to the narrative which you probably take for granted now, the 1% narrative, right? I didn't grow up with the 1% narrative. You have. And so it's led to 10 years of thinking about how to respond to the next crisis. So I'm seeing the new economy movement, the work in my field of ecological economics are really well positioned now to say there is another way. There is an alternative model. There's a different model for our economy that's more resilient and more fair. Look, at the end of the day, our economy and the most vulnerable in our economy, we're already in crisis, right? We're already living paycheck to paycheck. This is just simply shine the light on how vulnerable our system is. So we can't go back to the same thing. We have to pivot this time around. I'm so inspired by young people who might have been in grade school or middle school or high school during the Great Recession and came into their careers or into college and have actively searched for a different way, right? A different system, different thoughts, different processes. And so it's all teed up, like we're ready to rock and roll. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to deal immediately with the healthcare crisis, right? And at the same time be using the bills and the trillions of dollars that are going to be spent in the recovery to not just spend it on relief, but spend it on restructuring. This is a moment to deal with relief right away and restructure, not stimulate back to a status quo system that was already broke.
Yeah, definitely. Well said. Another question I have here is, how can Vermont's efforts locally make a difference on the very global issue of climate change?
The thing about dealing with climate change in Vermont is it's win-win-win-win, right? Spending that $2 billion plus of our hard-earned income on fossil fuels that we're not able to really recapture much, if any, of that benefit locally is a win-win for the Vermont economy. So weaning ourselves from fossil fuels, irregardless of climate change, makes a whole lot of sense. I don't accept the narrative that we're small and we're insignificant and how could us reducing greenhouse gas emissions affect the global climate. That's a ridiculous narrative, right? We need to show leadership. We need to do what's right ethically and morally, of course, but we also can do it in a way that maximizes all of these co-benefits, right? Of building, like we've been talking about, a more resilient, a more fair economy by getting off of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is a dead end. It's not a development strategy for Vermont. It's a depletion strategy for Vermont, right? So getting off of fossil fuels is good for our economy. It's good for our communities. It's good for our society. And oh, by the way, it's great for health as well, right? Because you get all the other nasty things by burning fossil fuels, not just greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, great answer. So I think that is all we have. I don't see any other questions coming in. So I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been listening. This is going to be posted on VPIRG's website with other resources about the COVID crisis at www.vpirg.org/COVID-19. So that is where this video will be posted, and the other webinars that we're doing and some other resources. But thank you to everyone, and thanks to Jon for having some great ideas and sharing them with us today.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks so much, Anna.
Thanks.